happy to be here because I love making this movie. The Philadelphia Experiment was one of the great ones.
I'd never done effects movies before, and all of a sudden, here we were, you know, making an effects film, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
This movie was charmed from beginning to end. All the things that you think could happen or you fear will happen, none of those things happened.
Captain Robertson, sir. It's a cutter. They say the Eldridge has vanished.
Of course she has. She's radar invisible.
No, sir. She's really vanished. She's gone.
I got involved with Philadelphia Experiment because I raised quite a bit of development money back in the really late 70s and early 80s. I had a partner named Tommy Vickers who came from Wichita, and he put together a lot of oil money just to develop screenplays. And I had done a movie called The Hazing, which got good reviews, and a couple of studios wanted to distribute it, but for reasons we can't go into, we didn't do that. But one of the people who really liked it was Robert Ramey. He had come over from New World and was CEO of Avco Embassy. And I said, let's make a deal. I went over there to direct films because he really liked me as a director. And he said, why don't we set you up in a development deal, and we'll bring scripts to you that you'll direct. And I had already told him about some development money that I'd raised, which is quite a lot. And I said, I'll pay for the screenplays, and if you see anything come through your office that you think is good, let me know and I'll develop it further. Or if you have another screenplay that I didn't develop but you think I'd be right to direct, we'll do it that way. But long story short, the first film that we developed was the Philadelphia Experiment. And he came to me and he said, you know, John Carpenter has written 2 acts of a film, but he can't finish it. He just can't figure out what the ending of it is. So I read it. It had nothing to do with this story at all. I mean, nothing. And I said, okay, this story isn't good for me, but I'd love to develop this from scratch. He said, okay, go for it. So I went out, I bought the book, you know, I had all rights to the Philadelphia Experiment. I did an enormous amount of research. I never really knew if it was anything about it was for real, but it was all said to be somewhat real. So 2 years and a number of writers later, I finally decided the story, because as the original story goes, when the ship disappeared, it was only gone for a couple of seconds, but when it came back, 2 crew members didn't come back with it. That's true, if the book is correct. So I said, that's the story, is what happened to those 2 guys. And so, we set about to write that story, and a couple of writers came on, a couple of writers made it happen.
You can start the generators now, Captain.
Commence operations.
This is Sea Dog, the small boy. Activate Rainbow 1.
This is Small Boy, roger out. All sections stand by for countdown.
Here we go.
The first thing I was shown was a 36 page script, not a treatment. He never had a treatment, as far as I know, or at least I didn't see it. He didn't work the story out. He had 36 pages, which were brilliant. I don't know if you've ever read John Carpenter's script, but we think of him as a director, but he's a great writer. I mean, you could not stop reading. Wonderful, wonderful screenwriter. And he had gotten so far, and he took the story in a whole other way. The movie does not reflect his work at all. And then he thought he'd gotten himself into a hole, he couldn't get out of it. And so instead of doing this one, he was contracted to Avco Embassy. Instead of doing this one, he said, well, I'll do a script I already have that I wrote in college, which was Escape from New York. So everybody was happy. Big hit for Avco and big hit for him. So, they did keep, I think he's attached as a producer or something.
John Carpenter's name was on the screenplay. And I knew his movies from The Fog and stuff like that. But I didn't know about his involvement until I met him for Village of the Damned. And he said, Michael, I didn't know what to do with the Philadelphia Experiment. It was a great idea. I knew there was a great story there, but I didn't know how to make it into a movie. And that's what I mean. He was like, how do you, I mean, this is an experiment that they were doing. It was based on a factual event. And how do you make that into a movie? So they handed it over to somebody else, and I read this, and it worked. He said, wow, you know, adding the romance is how we got to tell the story of the Philadelphia experiment and keep people's interest. You know, because you got to have, you know, the audience has got to play a part in the movie.
One of the reasons you see John's name on it is because John is so big in the foreign markets. And I pre-sold it at Cannes, a lot of foreign markets. And as much as anything else is because I paid John to be executive producer. And that's all they needed, just John Carpenter on it. And they'd buy it. So by that time, Robert Ramey went back to New World because it had been acquired by a couple of young investors who had a lot of money. And he said, why don't you bring that over to us and we'll make it. So I did.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, sir.
Everything in order? Yes, sir.
By the time I raised this money to do these screenplays, I had already decided I thought producing was really what I should be doing. And I was, you know, turns out I was pretty good at it. So by the time Philadelphia Experiment went into pre-production, I was the producer. And they brought on another producer because I'd never produced a film like this, just to see, you know, just to make sure that we were good. Fortunately for me, that guy was great. And we became very close friends. And he did Black Moon Rising as well. So that's how it all came about.
Prepare to get underway.
What the hell is that all about?
I don't know.
There were so many writers involved in this. I was the first writer on this. I had the Carpenter template, which was not a template, and I had the Berlitz book, which was about it, and I had this. There was a big treatment by this guy named Wallace Bennett, who was on the credits, but who never wrote anything. Huge stack of pages about this thing. I must have been the one who put it together. I don't want to be claiming credit where it's not due, because a lot of writers worked on this, and I don't even know most of them. In any movie's got more than one writer on it out of Hollywood, and the credits are always arbitrated. You go to an arbitration with 2 or 3 other people every time. You know, some you win, some you lose. This one had 10 writers in it.
When we went out to find a director for this movie, it was way before it was finished as a screenplay. I wanted a director involved that would help us develop it. And the first director we hired, although we didn't hire him, we paid him nothing, he just liked the project, and that was Joe Dante.
I guess I did a draft, and then Joe Dante came on, and I worked with Joe Dante. I mean, that was pretty close. We were together 2 or 3 months, and I did not solve the third act, which was, you know, what are you going to do? Are you going to get him? How's the science of it? So Joe was not happy with what I turned in, and I guess nobody else was either. And then I was told, you know, somebody else is coming in to do this. It was the first time that had happened to me, that I had been replaced. I usually was the replacer. I'm a natural rewriter, you know, and that's my other, when you look at my other credits, Eye for an Eye and Prom Night, Changeling, we were rewriters. I was a rewriter.
What? You gave the job to somebody else?
So Joe was on it for 6 or 7 months helping us develop the script. But then he got hired to do, it was Gremlins, which was a great movie. So he was no longer in the picture. I mean, Joe Dante's a fabulous talent. But so we didn't have him any longer. And, you know, at the point, by the time we got to the end of the process, we'd attracted a company that wanted to co-produce it and co-finance it. And the woman who was head of production just loved the script. And I had promised another director the job. His name was Harley Cokless. And she didn't like him. She didn't like the films he'd done before, and they wouldn't finance it if he were going to be in charge. So I said to him, listen, he said, I've got another script I can bring you of Carpenter, which is Black Moon Rising. And I said, you're it. Nothing's going to stop you from directing that. And he did.
And then somehow I got back. I mean, they went on, they had other writers, a guy named Don Jacoby, who was he was the big name. He had done Blue Thunder, a movie about helicopters over Los Angeles, and he did Arachnophobia later. He had some really good credits. So he did something, and he's on the story credit. And then a guy named Michael Janover, who I did not know at all, came in and actually solved the third act. I wish I knew what the exact problem was. I haven't seen the movie in a while. It's like he goes into the thing and they have to shut it off. Nobody came up with that for whatever reason. I couldn't. And he did. And that's like, once you got that, it would all work. And so Michael Janover is really the hero of this piece, but for him, they would not have made this movie. But then they didn't like other stuff he did, so they brought me back because Doug Curtis and then Joel Michaels was on it. And Joel Michaels had produced The Changeling, so he knew me. So both the producers knew me, so I was in a good spot. And so they brought me back to do the final polish, and I was like the last guy on. So I was first and last out of 10. I was number 1 and number 10. So that's probably why I got the first credit. Anyway, although IMDb has it all wrong. If you notice, they give Wallace Bennett the credit for the screenplay. No, he never even wrote a screenplay. But I don't want to get into these old issues.
Once who refused to hire a director, and the picture that he refused to hire the director for turned out to be a failure, and the next time the director's name came up, the producer said, no, he was associated.
I know this guy. Is this another movie?
I ever had. I think...
No, David. This is not a movie.
The Ronald Reagan stuff, that was me. I know that. I think the characters I set. I know all the opening, the romance, the dance at the gym, whatever it is. That was all mine. The structure was mine, except for I couldn't solve it. I never would have, honestly. And that was my downfall. But then a happy ending. I came back at the end. There was some dispute as to who wrote what, but whatever. We'll never know. You know, it's all in the fog at this point, to go to another John Carpenter reference.
So we had no director by the time the script was completed. But at that point, the company that was co-financing it really didn't care who it was, as long as they felt he could pull it off. And they knew Stewart from something, I'm not even sure what, but they liked how he'd handled bigger action films with no budget. I met Stewart, he was just finishing up, what was the name of it? I can't even remember the name of the movie, but you know, we just hit it off immediately. I loved his energy, I loved his personality. I just thought, this guy can take this and make it into the big film that I believe it should be. With the budget we had, that was not going to be real easy, but it could be done because, you know, at the time that budget was fairly substantial.
I was just finishing off a picture at MGM called the Ice Pirates, and I got a call to do this picture. So I read the script, and it had like 6 different writers that all worked on it, from John Carpenter onward. But it didn't really work as a personal story as well as a sci-fi story. So it was based on a book, and it reputedly really happened. So I suggested we need to rewrite this thing a little bit I wanted to have somebody from the past appear in the movie with the actors later. So there was a love story at the beginning, and then I had Michael Pire meet the girl in the future, which was an emotional moment because it was a human moment as opposed to just all the action and the surprise of doing something that was, scientific and dealing with the facts that they were in the future and everything. That's not enough to sustain a movie. I wanted to have an emotional basis for it too.
Stuart Raffle, who came in and directed it, was I don't think he particularly liked the final draft. I know he's on record as saying that, so I'm not making it up. I didn't know him very well. He came in really right at the end, and I did a great job. And it has to be said. I mean, all credit to him. And I know he changed some things, and I know he says he changed a lot of things. When I saw it, finally, I never got to the editing room in this one. I was sort of out and doing other things. But when I finally saw it, it was complete, I thought, no, this is what I wrote. But he did all kinds of other things. Stuart Raffle's like 6'6". He's the tallest director I've ever met. And I'm 5'8". So I was always looking at him like this. So I was always like the junior. And I was a kid then. I was really young. So I don't know who, I guess he thought he was kind of stuck with this kid.
So then I went to the studio and I said, I need to do this thing. The writer didn't do what we asked. And the head of the studio said, well, you know, what did you want to do? I said I wasn't going to do the movie because it didn't have this human element. And he said, well, just do that. And I said, well, I'm starting the film in like two and a half weeks. I said, there's no time. He said, well, did you ever dictate a script or anything? I said, no. He said, well, I'm going to send a secretary to you in the morning and a secretary to you in the afternoon, and you can go ahead and just do the story you told me. So I lay on my back for a week and dictated this new concept of the story. It was the same structure, but I inserted this human element and everything. But then that put us way behind on the production, and they were all set to make it. Nancy Allen was hired, and Michael Pare was hired, and we were all set to go. The producers were there, so it was a big rush to make it.
What about me? What happened to me, Pamela?
You never came back, David. You just never came back.
In Philadelphia Experiment, I play a guy named David Hurtig, right? And I'm one of the sailors on the boat with Bobby DeCicco. Bobby DeCicco and I were buddies, you know, and we're in the Navy. It's World War II, but in the, you know, you go where you're assigned. And we just happened to be on the Eldridge, and we're assigned to this special thing that they're going to put all of these, you know, electric generators, magnetic generators on the ship, and they're going to do an experiment that will hopefully make the Navy invisible to radar. By creating this magnetic field around it, the radar will bounce off instead of, you know, bounce back. It would be like diverted. Like it was like primitive stealth technology. It was the beginning of, you know, investigating stealth technology. It was right after they found the crashed spaceship in Roswell, and they were, what do you call that, reverse engineering. And this was the first idea. Einstein, Opperman, who's the other guy? Tesla and L. Ron Hubbard were all on the Eldridge when they were working on the Philadelphia Experiment, when they were trying to make us invisible to radar, because that was a big deal. Radar was a new discovery, and you know they could, you know, if they knew where your ships were, they could hit you with rockets and cannons and all kinds of stuff. So it was, we were just sailors. But when the Eldridge went into the vortex and we disappeared and reappeared somewhere else, it was like, it was in South Carolina and it reappeared in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. On the way back, we got lost, and instead of coming out just in a different location, we came out at a different time, from like 1945 to 1984. Boom, and that's where we meet Nancy Allen, and that's where the adventure to find out what happened and to find out where Bobby was, and it was, you know, we're just, you know, American servicemen. Well, you know, if they were going to make a movie based on the book, it would have had to be a documentary. You know, and so they dramatized it, you know, and it's all about making a great story and revealing this secret stuff that was going on. I mean, this was ultra top secret stuff, you know, and to reveal that to the public, they added the romance and the drama and the adventure.
Your ship and our town trapped together.
How did it happen?
We don't know exactly. But somehow the electromagnetic fields created in two experiments, one in 1943 and the other now, cross-connected. They created a vortex, a hole in the space-time continuum, and you fell through it.
It was a story I wanted to tell. You know, I came to believe that it probably didn't really happen, but it had built up such a cult following by then. And today, there's so many people who believe that the Philadelphia Experiment actually happened. I think some version of it might have happened, but I don't think it actually disappeared. So I let all of that go, and I said, you know, let's make a love story. Let's make a story where these two guys go into the future, have no idea how to survive because it's so absolutely different. And one of them falls in love with somebody from a whole different generation, a whole different time. And then it becomes, am I going back or am I staying here with you? And of course, by the end of the movie, he wants to stay there, but he has to go back and shut this experiment down, which he does. And I thought by the time we got the script worked out, we had a really good movie on our hands.
The source of energy explosion in the vortex is the generators on the Eldridge. You have to go back and shut them down, David.
I'm not doing anything for you.
I'm afraid you've no alternative.
The first time I heard about it, I was in a hotel in New Jersey. We were shooting Eddie and the Cruisers, and my manager showed up, and she said, this is a movie that they want you for. And the director on Eddie got really mad that she was pitching other movies while I was working on his. But she told me the story, and I said, oh my God, Philadelphia Experiment. I read this book when I was in high school. And she said, so? And I said, so, I can't read it while I'm shooting this. And then I went off to Australia to do a period piece, and while I was over there, I got sent Streets of Fire. And when I came back, I shot Streets of Fire right away. And about a month after Streets of Fire, we did Philadelphia Experiment. Streets of Fire was not a quick one. We had like 60 shooting days, which was an incredible schedule. Eddie and the Cruisers was 40 shooting days. Streets of Fire was 60. Philadelphia, it seemed like forever because we started in like Charleston, South Carolina, and we went across the United States from city to city, which was really cool because, you know, I was new in the business, and the idea of touring America, you know, making a movie, it was like, wow, it's like being a rock star. We're going on tour.
Get in the car! Go! Go! Come on! Go! Go!
He was up there. You know, our casting director was a woman named Linda Francis, who's passed away, unfortunately, but she had been very close to the old New World and now the New World. And she liked Perret. I mean, she really liked him. She liked Eddie and the Cruisers. She liked Streets of Fire, which nobody had seen yet. And I met him, and, you know, I thought, this guy has certainly got the physical qualities. He looks like he could be a, you know, a sailor from 1943. And he had the masculinity, just everything about him I liked. So we saw some other people. We saw, you know, I won't even mention names, but we saw some names that were a little bit bigger than him, but not much. And within a very short time, we just went for it. Michael was our guy.
He has a weird Stallone-ness about his delivery, the way he speaks. He's kind of just got this unique way of speaking and moving when he acts, which he echoes through all his roles, and you know instantly, you can hear it's Michael Parry on the screen. And I think that lends itself to creating a persona that stands out. And quite frankly, he had a very good role in the film. So he carried that film all the way through.
We got caught up in this freak thing. Just the two of us. I don't know what it was, but somehow we got moved in time.
I came on the movie at the very end for this, and they had already actually talked to these actors, and I met Michael Paré just to see how I got on with him, and he was a wonderful guy, and he was from back east, and he had that New Jersey accent, which I thought was, you know, very endemic of that period of time in history. And Nancy Allen, of course, had done some big films, and they were a great couple together. So I was very lucky that they fell into place. He had just done a big musical, Streets of Fire, and he was so wonderful in it. When I saw that, I thought, God, we're lucky to have this kid, you know? And so we went off and did the film.
Here, dig in.
Well, I was thrilled with Nancy Allen because I was crazy about her from Carrie in 1941 and Dressed to Kill, right? Oddly enough, coincidence, I live in West Hollywood. I live in a building, one of those older buildings, and Brian De Palma and Nancy Allen had lived in the flat upstairs just before I got in. I mentioned this to Nancy Allen, who totally could not have cared less. I've never seen such a nothing reaction. Anyway, yeah, okay.
She read it. She liked it. Said, I'd like to do this. So she was good. At that time, she was pretty hot. You know, she had made some movies and made some money. And so those two didn't meet until 2 weeks into filming.
Yeah, I mean, come on. You know, I was 24 years old, and Nancy Allen was a super hottie in the Brian De Palma movies, right? I mean, she had been in Dressed to Kill. She had been in Carrie. She had been in, you know, a lot of, you know, great movies. I mean, big movies. I mean, Brian De Palma was a big director. So, yeah, I knew her work really well. But, you know, I didn't know who was in it until we got to Charleston, and then I met her.
How you doing?
Fine.
We haven't actually met yet.
In the scene with Nancy Allen where we have, it was written, the love scene in the horse trailer, you know, he didn't want it to be like a Playboy Channel thing. He wanted it to be a love story. And not, because I know some of the producers wanted Nancy in lingerie and all this stuff because of Dressed to Kill. But Stewart said, I like the football jersey thing. There's just something, you know, without sin there. It's like, you know, and so when we had the initial thing where we wake up in the horse trailer, instead of me jumping and fucking the beautiful, sexy Nancy Allen, he wanted me to fall in love, you know, and I kissed her face, and she fell in love. She didn't like have an orgasm. It was like, ah, it was a love story and not a simulated sex. The shot at the end where I come out of the vortex and it's like the love of Nancy's character that brings me back to that period. They spent a lot of time trying to figure out that last ending shot. It was kind of like the end of a love story, the beginning of a love story.
The rest of the cast was just, you know, Linda Francis bringing this person, that person. You know, everybody kind of wanted to be in the movie at that time. It had a lot of heat around town. So I think we got a great cast. One of the things I learned about me making this movie is that I was a good producer. I knew how much money we had, and I knew where we had allocated it. You know, we went to Charleston, South Carolina, because they had that museum, that boat museum.
Worried about losing your job, Joe? I'll believe it when I see him do it.
Well, we'll find out soon enough.
I went to the Navy to get permission to film in the Philadelphia shipyards, which is where the story actually started. And all of a sudden, the Navy was so, oh no, you can't make that movie. And I was beginning to believe then that maybe this really happened. Maybe there was something really realistic about this. And but they were emphatic, so we couldn't film that, and we didn't have any ships, big naval ships, to do the movie. And then I found out that down in Charleston, they had a naval museum which the Navy had given to the city. It included the Hood, the big aircraft carrier, a submarine, and another big ship as well. So it was perfect.
We shot on an aircraft carrier, and you know, it was like one of the aircraft carriers from World War II. You know, and there's 5,000 people on this ship, and I'm like, wow, you get an idea of how big. Remember in Star Wars, the dun 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 dun. There's like maybe 5% the size of Darth Vader's ship, but it was like being on there and realizing there was 5,000 people to get this boat over there so those planes could go and fight and drop bombs and shit. But it was like, wow, it was really cool. And I remember we go out on this tugboat, you know, to get over me onto the ship. And Stewart was like a Viking because it was raining, and he was like, "Oh, Dan!" You know, it was such a ball. I mean, you see, Stewart was having so much fun making this movie. It just bled over. It was like, "Yeah, wow, man, this is." It was exciting to be around.
Well, you get to go out without Pam tonight, hotshot.
Yeah? We'll be in quarantine starting tonight.
Forget quarantine. I got it all worked out, buddy.
We were able to shoot on that carrier for a week. They had a destroyer right next to it that we could say was the ship in our movie.
The other ship, which was a cruiser, was like the ship that disappeared. So we made arrangements to have that ship, and it's old, I mean, it's from the war, towed out into the river to film. So we all arrived in the morning to start shooting autumn time. No, it was just before Christmas. And the people that towed the boat out suddenly said, it's going to cost a lot more than $40,000. And I thought that was a lot of money to tow a boat out into the middle of the river. And so I said, well, how much is it? And the guy said, it's going to be over $100,000. And then the two producers, who were lovely people, they were like aghast and everything. So I said, well, I'm just going to do it with a special effect. And then they were like, well, how can you have a ship in the middle of the sea? And I said, the special effects guy's here. Well, and I said to him, can we make a model of it? He says, yes, you can make a perfect model, but it's going to cost you $12,000. I said, well, there's a lot of difference between $120,000 and $12,000. So we just shot a plate. A steady camera on the river, and then later on, we inserted the ship, and it had all the special effects, which you'll see in the film that appear. But that ship never really happened. It was just the beginning of the special effects era when you began to realize that what you can do is almost anything, which was a wonderful, exciting experience and everything.
You have any more brilliant ideas?
Yeah. We're still in Philadelphia. This is all part of the experiment.
They did something to our minds.
Then we went to the desert. We went to Utah, Nevada, right on the line, and we shot the salt flats. It was unbelievably difficult to do it because when we shot there, it was 30 below zero. And these two guys had to come out of, come into this world with their, their shirts on and nothing else. And it was so cold. I mean, the cameras almost froze up. It was that cold. We had blankets all over everything.
Maybe all this isn't real. Maybe it's a hallucination. They could have hypnotized us. They do that to people,
You're telling me this is my imagination? And we're not freezing our asses off out here?
2 days before Christmas, we go back to Salt Lake and we do a scene where Michael Pare is being chased by these naval police officers. And he runs through a restaurant, leaps off a balcony and does all these impressive effects, all the stuntman did. Then he runs out onto the street and it's actually snowing and the streets are wet and slush and everything and it was bleak and the producer says, you've got a whole of the sequence you've got to shoot here. And I knew I had. And I walked out there and I think, how am I going to do a whole big sequence here? And I thought, I'm just going to do a one-er. A one-er means you do the whole scene with one take and you have to figure out where to put the camera so you can incorporate everything into it. And Nancy Allen's driving through town looking for Michael in the story, and I put myself in the back seat next to the cameraman, and she's driving, and we set off, and we're looking over her shoulder, looking through the front window, and all of a sudden you see Michael Pare running down the street with these officers chasing him and everything. So she races past the three officers, all in their beautiful naval suits, which always look great, I always think. And they're chasing him, and she leans out the window and says, "Michael, over here!" And she pulls alongside, "Get in!" He jumps in the back seat next to the camera, and we pan over and see him, and then back to Nancy, and then she races away. And as we're racing away from this scene, and these officers are chasing us down the street, a big pickup truck suddenly pulls out and slams his brakes on in front of us and stops us. And it was a citizen who was going to help the naval officers catch us and everything. And I had to jump out of the car she was driving and say, no, we're making a movie. So it was very funny, but it was pretty exciting as well. And that's called a one-er. We got it all in one take. Otherwise, you have to cover it from here and here and here and here. And it was all done in one piece. Then we went home, and it was so cold and so bleak. And the town was so crowded with all the traffic, it was good to be through it. And it looks good on the film. So it's another one of those things where the circumstances force you into something that ends up looking more real and believable than if you actually dissected it into all the cuts that most films usually have.
It's coming back, Davey.
But going back to Wendover, Wendover is right on the border of Nevada and Utah. And Wendover Air Force Base, I believe it was an Air Force base, is where the Enola Gay took off to bomb Japan. And by this time, when we got there, nothing was going on there. There was nothing at all. But there was this huge hangar and buildings around it.
It had these offices, it had a hangar. It actually had the ramp which they used to push this huge nuclear weapon up onto the plane and attach it and do all that stuff. And I was back there with my friend just looking around at the locations and everything. And it was deserted, it was disintegrating. And I thought to myself, boy, this would make a good fire. I mean, it was 3 stories high and it was several buildings. So my friend said, well, why don't you go and talk to the mayor because they own it. I said, I think I'll do that. So I spoke to the producers. That's okay, go and talk to him. So I went and found the mayor of the town, which wasn't hard to do. It was just a gambling casino town. And I said, do you own these buildings? And you know, where the bombs were loaded onto the Enola Gay and everything. He said, yes, we own it. The federal government gave it to the city, but, you know, it's just a liability, really.
And we went to the people who own it, which I think was the state or the government, and said, we'd like to burn this down. And they said, oh, you would, huh? Yeah. So they said, how much have you got to spend? I said, well, you tell us what it would cost us to buy this and burn it. And they said $10,000. And I said, okay, you got it. So that's what happened. We buy the town, we buy that whole base, and, you know, on the night, we just lit it up. It was great.
Unauthorized vehicle approaching control area. Let's go!
And you had to have a town that could be sucked into the vortex, right? So while we were shooting on the, what are they called, the salt flats? The Utah salt flats, Nevada salt flats, where they do the fast car races like the Green Monster and stuff like that. There was a town then, they burnt the whole town. They burnt the whole town. This was a story. So we're outside the vortex and they're burning the town and they're saying, get closer, you know, and we're getting closer. And I put my arm up and my arm blistered, you know, and they hit the ground, you know, and I fall down and it's like, and I had to crawl away from it because it was so hot. I mean, this is the desert, it's at night, and the whole town is burning. I'm talking like, you know, like 6 blocks they lit on fire because it's wood. But it was like, wow, that wasn't special effect. There was no added fire. They burnt that town to the ground. You know, and Stuart would say, get closer, you know, and it's like, yeah, man, we're making a movie, it's gonna be important, you know, and it's like, whoa, and you know, it's like, it blistered on me and I hit the ground. But you know, it was like such a ball. It was, and you know what? Did you get it? Did you get it? We got it. Put something on that. And, you know, and it wasn't like we were all on the same team. It was really cool.
That's what was going on. In fact, we had a great young first AD with us up to that point. And Stuart was moving so fast and all of this fire and everything else. And he at one point said, stop, cut. And Stuart said, we're not cutting, God damn it, we're not cutting. He said, you've got to cut. I'm calling cut. I mean, he was a DGA guy. And he was right. He was absolutely right. We should have cut. But Stuart said, no way, because it was burning fast. We had to get it. And these guys had to run in front of that fire, and they couldn't do it many times. So we kept going. And the next morning, he said, I'm out of here. We had to bring it on another AD. So it was busy that night. Let's just say that.
In the film, you'll see we just set them all on fire and had this huge flame, and you know it was not a huge budget film, so it added all this amazing special effects to the film and production value. So that's what happens when you make films sort of on the lam and freewheeling, which it was because it was sort of a small independent film, really.
Are you ready for this? I've been there before. Here we go.
Everybody was on the same boat, and Stuart was like the captain. You know, he just would not be denied. I mean, he's still that way. He drives his wife crazy because she's his producer. But he just would not be, he'd say, let's go shoot that. And I'd say, we didn't plan for that. He said, we can make that happen. Come on, let's go. And you know, at 6'7", you know, he's not easy to say no to with that personality. So we'd find a way to do it if it was at all possible.
Stuart was like, you know, he'd just kind of hang around with us, you know, and talk about the scenes and talk about the story and talk about the idea of, you know, he didn't get into the science and the technology of it. It's just imagine, you know, you get sucked into this like dream thing and you come out and you're on Earth, but it's another time. And the technology is completely different. And the world is depending on you. And, you know, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on you, Michael. And I said, yeah. And he said, so what, how do you feel about that? And I said, well, I'm just a sailor, you know. It's not like I'm a hero. I'm not even like a captain, not even an officer. I'm just a guy who gets drafted. And he's like, yeah, so I mean, you'd be, you know, kind of like lost in time and you know, why me? And I said, yeah. And he just had a very nice way of talking with us. And he would hang out with us. We would eat and hang around because we were on the road for most of the movie, we started out in Charleston, and then we went on to, you know, these other towns. We went to a place called Wendover, which was on the border of Utah and Nevada. So half the hotel was Mormon, so there was no drinking, there was no entertainment, there's nothing. But you walk across the lobby and there's a casino. We learned how to shoot craps there. So, you know, we went to all these different places and we hung out and we talked about it. And it was a great adventure, man. It would have been great to just be on the crew because of the adventure of going across America, you know.
Okay, Jerry, you read it? Put it up on your monitor. There it is. Lock it over.
The UHF frequencies now.
Okay, go ahead. We read.
They went to Utah, they went in the desert, and north of LA in Santa Paula, which was a beautiful location. That's where the scene with David Hurtig and his wife is. That was the only time I was on the set.
Can I help you?
Mrs. Parker?
Yes.
They drive into town, which is Santa Paula, and I think we even call it Santa Paula in the movie. Drive by this huge tree that is like a landmark that everybody knows about the town. They pull into a standard gas station, which his dad used to own. Now it's 1984. And his dad was a racer too, raced, you know, like Indy type cars. So he goes in, he looks around the garage, and there's his dad standing by a race car. And she comes by, and that's when she first believes that he's from a different time. That's the moment in this film when she says, "You've got to be from another town, because this you wouldn't make this up." So we shot there for one day. I love the scene, you know. It was just great for production value because you knew that we'd been all over the country. Eventually we came back to Southern California and finished it in Southern California. And the last thing we shot was all the stuff in the control room, which we built on stage, of course.
It's incredible. It's as if every storm front in the region were being sucked into this one tiny zone. We have 3 separate reports of tornadoes, and that doesn't happen here.
Where's it centered now?
About 40 miles due east of here.
I'll be back.
The visual effects challenge, the biggest one of all, was the vortex that they go through. In fact, I just saw Endgame the other 2 weekends ago. And the vortex they go through time traveling, I swear to God, it's the exact vortex, which you think that's going to be cheesy, but it's not. It wasn't then. But it took, you know, our visual effects coordinator was a guy named Max Anderson, who was a brilliant young guy. He'd worked on Star Wars. He came out of that whole group of people. And he just found a way to do everything. But the ship in the water, yes, we didn't have a ship in the water. But we were on that great carrier, so that's what we needed. We knew we could put a ship there. And it doesn't look as good as it would now, but it's perfectly fine in the movies today. You know, you buy it. So that was a challenge. The vortex was the most fun because that took months and months of just computer time to do it.
The premise of this is that the future can affect the past. Now, how do you show that? It's like they start it up again, and the unfinished business of the 1943 thing, somehow they connect out there in the space-time continuum, and how could that possibly happen? And how do you explain that? So I actually went up to Caltech, which is a big, very big science university in Pasadena, and outskirts of Los Angeles. And I contacted a top physicist, young guy, a genius, clearly. As soon as he found out it was a movie, he said, "Yeah, come on over." You know, he loved it. And so I explained my problem, you know, how do I, and he says, "Well, what you need is a wormhole." I have always been claiming, and I'm going to claim again here, that that's the first use of a wormhole in any motion picture. Because I had never heard of it. When he gave it to me, I had, you know, and it was barely anything to look up because it wasn't being talked about. And I happen to know that the Back to the Future, Bob Zemeckis' crew, which was going to be starting just after we finished, it came out in '85, came into the editing room and had a look to see how we dealt with all that. Because they were curious about the science too. They didn't go into it.
How do you film time travel? What does it really mean? How does it really work? Well, you can get to speak to a scientist about it to see what he thinks it should be or what he thinks it is, but it's too mathematical for you to really input to an audience. But you still have to make a decision as a director, you have to have an image of what you believe it is and how it would look on film. And if you believe in it and you stick to the rules of the paradigm that you've invented to tell the story, then it works. But if you then start going off onto a tangent, it gets bad again. A scientist did explain to me that it was possible because it was like a Ventura in a carburetor on a car, where when the gases speed up through the channel, when gases come together and they get more pressured, they speed up, and that increases time. That's how he described it. But still, it's beyond me still. What it is people don't want to go through all that. They want to see what happens to the actors. They want to see the action, and they want to see the resolution of the story in the end in a big, exciting way. They're not really interested in the mathematics of Einstein and a few others.
We had a lot of stuff we just didn't know yet how we were going to do it. And we'd hired a big name visual effects coordinator, a big name at the time, may still be, and actually met him on the set of that Clint Eastwood movie about the Russian MiG. What was it called? Firefox. So we went out to a hangar in Van Nuys where they shot that scene, and I mean, I just loved it because I got to watch Clint Eastwood direct. But the guy we'd hired was there because he was on that film. And eventually what he came up with for price was just beyond anything we could do. I mean, there were so many visual effects in this movie that we had to find somebody that was hungry, that wanted to prove himself, that didn't want to be seen as somebody that came out of Lucas camp and that Lucas did everything, but, So we got him. Max Anderson was a friend of Stewart's, and I met him, and he was just a great guy, very shy, tall, brilliant guy.
Max Anderson was the special effects guy. He'd worked with George Lucas's company on doing some of the first Star Wars movies and everything. So in those days, you were just limited to what they could do with that system. And we just built a big control room which was in it. And then up on the screens, we projected a lot of the activity with the effects that were happening. And they were storms and lightning bolts and all sorts of things like that. Then the ship flying in space, all done with just classic, basic special effects. But it worked within the story because the humans worked, and we didn't spend a huge amount of money on that, but it worked because it was sort of organic and everything.
We just had so many conversations about how we can do this, how we can do that, because then you couldn't say, we'll take care of it in post like you do now, even though, eventually it is taken care of in post. You had to know exactly what you were going to do. You couldn't just say, well, we'll figure that out in post. So we did, and he did, and we pulled it off. The visual effects of that movie are a long way from where we are now, obviously. But for the time, and even now when you look at it, it's kind of charming in its own, old-fashioned way.
You ready?
Let's go.
All right, good luck, sailor.
Well, then you get into the post-production. We had a very good editor on the film, Neil Travis, who actually went on to make huge films. And he was a wonderful editor. Usually when I finish a movie, I always let the editors do what they want, so I get the benefit of what they can produce first, and then try to then work in what I want. It's usually a horrifying thing when you see somebody else's cut of your film, because it doesn't utilize the footage as you originally think it should be. So I've learned when I do a movie to look at it at least 3 times before I have an opinion, so I can shed my own preconceptions and then get into the actual work that the editor has done and incorporate the best of that. His film was almost a perfect cut from the beginning, and I showed it to the head of the studio, and he says he couldn't believe it because we'd finished the film, and 6 weeks later, there was the finished film. We'd done it so quickly, and including all the effects and everything. So it was a very organized and very smooth operation, considering, all the discordancy of what we're going to do and what we weren't going to do, and the written material, was it good enough, and then shooting it without prep.
I don't think we did a single reshoot, not a single one. In fact, Robert Ramey, when he came over to see the first cut, we were waiting for him to say, oh, we can't do that, we can't do that. He just sat there for a minute and said, I love this. Don't change a frame. I swear to God, we locked the film that day. Not one reshoot. So, the only thing I can say about it is every day was exciting. I just thought, pinch myself, because I never could have dreamed I would be here making this movie.
Davey.
It was the first movie that I went to see dailies on. Because Stuart said, you got to see this. And I was like, what about the sci-fi? What about the special effects and all that? He said, it's coming, but look at this shot. But it was after the movie was done. So I was excited about it, and I don't know. I mean, was it what I was hoping? Yeah, it was a love story and a dramatic piece. It's set in a sci-fi environment. It's a sci-fi genre with a love story.
We did 3 test screenings. New World liked 3 places. One was Kansas City, one was Las Vegas, and one was San Diego, I think. Just played like gangbusters. I mean, it got the highest scores you could imagine. Everybody loved it. So going into that opening weekend, nobody thought anything about whether this was going to be a success or not. Bob Ramey was the one that had the idea of opening it on the first day of the U.S. Olympics, 1984, in Los Angeles. And his thinking was, nobody's going to be, there's not going to be any movies opening against us, because the Olympics is going to just dominate. And I said, well, great. I think that's a great idea. But it turns out that there was another movie opening against us, and it was Purple Rain. And Purple Rain was an instant hit. Our movie did well. It was well reviewed for the most part, but it just didn't have the strength that, Purple Rain had.
I think it did okay. It got a good release. It was like big theaters, probably the best release I ever had, and even after the best release. I mean, the theater I saw it in was like an A theater in Los Angeles. It's maybe one of 2 movies that I did where I actually paid to see it. The other one was Eye for an Eye, because I knew the Norris fans would love it. But this one, I mean, I went to opening night of this in Los Angeles and in Westwood, the big movie capital there, and full house, and they loved every second of it. And that Reagan joke really went over. As did the line right at the end, the last line of the movie, which is Michael Pare says, I just figured out that they owe me 40 years back pay. And the whole audience roared. This is a Stuart Rappel line. And when I saw it in the script, I thought, oh man, what? That's kind of lame. No. And he said, I'm going to do it. Of course he's going to do it. He's the director. But as soon as I heard that audience laugh, I started claiming that line ever since. So I'm now confessing it was not mine.
You know what? Got it all figured out.
Immediately after it went out of the theaters, went on VHS, it became a hit. I mean, it became an absolute cult hit. Everybody discovered it on tape. I'd go into, every Blockbuster in the country, wherever I was, and I'd say, do you have a Philadelphia Experiment? And they'd say, yeah, it just happens it's the manager's favorite film. And you go by it, and there's somebody's favorite film in every store. So, the film ultimately did extremely well, and continues to.
Massive fan. In fact, I watched it fairly recently, and I even remember the music and some of the lines, so I think I probably videoed it when it was on TV. I remember getting out the video shop, but when it was on TV, I remember videoing it, and I must have played it to death, because it's just a fun film. I mean, I just remember watching it thinking, A, it's got to be true. It's the kind of thing the American government will do, and it just brought me in. I think it's got some great iconic moments in it that have just survived. Primarily for me, the one that is burnt into my brain is the shot near the end when it returns and people are fused to the decks. And I remember as a kid, just looking at that in horror going, that is so awesome. And that resonated with me, you know, right throughout my whole cinema going experience thereafter.
You gonna go back?
I don't know. I just can't stay here.
We'll ever see you again?
One of these days. I promise you that.
You know what bothered me? Some critic said that a weepy Michael Paré, because, you know, I was freaking out. And I was like, not the character was. I mean, you know, I was playing the reality of it instead of the action hero thing of it, you know. And this was a choice that, you know, was made. I wasn't throwing a fit and saying it has to be like this. They were, you know, they liked that. We went for the love story instead of the action thing. And I thought I got attacked. But hey, you know, it didn't stop my career. I mean, right after that, I did a couple little ones, and then I did a TV series for a couple of years. So, I mean, you know, not all critics get you.
It's all over. You're gonna be all right now. But I gotta go, buddy.
Quite frankly, as my father used to say, they don't call them critics for no reason. That's what they do. They criticize things. So reading reviews on your work is, you know, not a very pleasant thing, even if it's a positive thing. There's always something they pick on, some fault you've made, some flaw in the story, and the more ambitious the story, the larger the flaw appears. It did get pretty good reviews, and they've improved as time's gone by, which is interesting because nowadays, a lot of the films that I made in the past seem to be garnering more fame and fortune than when they were made. I did Mac and Me, for example, which is a kids movie that's just become another sort of, everybody wants to, grew up on it and now wants to see it again and talk about it. And I think today a lot of people like these films because it plugs them in to their youth and how they evolve themselves through films to the modern world we live in, which is all technology, which was sort of shown ahead of time in films.
When I finished Philadelphia Experiment, I really thought this should have a sequel. This was 2 or 3 years later. By that time, one of my close friends in this business was a guy named Roger Burlage, who'd been CFO at AFCO Embassy, CFO at New World under Ramey. He'd been with Ramey this whole time. He met a man who owned Vidmark at that time, and he brought him in to be CEO of that company. So I went to him and the guy who owned the company, and I said, I'd like to do a sequel to Philadelphia Experiment. And they said, boy, so would we. So, I mean, just like that, they said, let's do it. And brought in this writer named Steve Cornwell, who just a brilliant young guy. And he started writing a script, which was pretty good. And I said, but one of the things we have to do, if I'm going to get involved, you have to contractually promise me that the budget will be $4 million or more, and that Michael Paré will be in the movie. So they said, okay, that makes perfect sense. So they go off to Cannes, and they start selling the movie, and I get a call from the guy who owns the company. He says, we can't pay that much for Michael Paré. His movies just haven't done so well. And I said, what do you mean? We've already made an offer to his agent, and he's accepted it. Well, we just can't do it. We're going to have to get out of it. We offered him $300,000 and they wouldn't do it. And I said, of course they wouldn't do it. He's already been offered $400,000. So at that point, I knew what the screenplay was. I knew that it was nothing like the first movie. I knew they had $3 million, not $4 million. I knew they didn't have Michael Paré. And I said, I don't want to do this movie any longer. He said, well, you have to do it. You've got to be the producer on this. Because my name by that time, I was the producer of the Philadelphia Experiment. So I said, okay, just buy me off. So they paid me twice as much as I would have if I'd actually produced it, just for my name.
You know, a big mistake I made in my career is they wanted to do a sequel to Philadelphia Experiment. And they came to me, and it was a good company. It was Vidmark. And Stephen Cornwell, who is, I made a movie with him in Israel, and he was a brilliant writer. and now he's a script doctor, and he's made a bunch of screenplays. And I was close with Stephen. I mean, they asked me who I wanted to direct it, and I said, Stephen Cornwell, he's brilliant. But then the producer, one of the lesser producers, got in my face and said, you know, and he showed me exactly how much I'm worth. And I got, you know, I was insulted, and I turned it down in a very rude way. Because I just couldn't deal with that, like showing me the numbers of exactly what I was worth to the public. And, you know, if that had not happened, if I had just dealt with the director, with Stephen, and worried about, you know, it doesn't matter because it was going to be a great movie. But I had to pass. I took personal offense. And they made it without me, but they cut the budget by like 80%, and it didn't work.
I honestly don't remember all the details, but it was definitely Michael in that post-1984 period where things have not gone so well for him. And he's trying to put it all back together. So it would have been a good movie, you know, and we would have had some great visual effects scenes, you know, 2 or 3 good scenes without embarrassing the rest of the way.
I know it's completely different. It's about like if the Nazis had won, it's like the Man in the High Tower. It's that plot. But they kept the character name. And now the character name is John Carpenter's. I did not invent the names. So that's probably the one thing that came from his pages. Except, you know, the whole sense of paranoia.
When I was first approached to do a kind of reboot, remake, reimagining of a Philadelphia Experiment, first and foremost, as an absolute geek, I geeked out. I was in there straight away. Rewatched the film, and again, I didn't want to do something that would in any way damage that film, because I grew up on it. I mean, it's like making a version of Star Wars. You don't want to damage what's gone before, and it was quite an influential film for me. It was just a fun movie. So I went into it with a little bit of reverence and a whole lot of geekiness, reading past magazines, and then I went online and found out everything I could about the Eldritch, and then found out what new things we could bring in, which mostly on paper were kind of big because there's no budget, yeah, so you can be as big as you want. The opening scene was an entire aircraft carrier, which then got moved down to a Humvee. So you can imagine big on paper, and I remember quite excitedly coming up with the term Eldritch Energy, thinking, have I taken that from one of the films, or have I read that somewhere else? But hey, so it was an idea to build on the legend and add a little bit more. Just got me really excited. But ultimately, I think the Philadelphia Experiment, in any guise, it's a great incident, it's a great fun moment, make a battleship go invisible and then throw it through time, wonderful. But at the heart of it, you have to have some characters that you really care about. And one of the ideal things for any kind of thriller is a man or woman on the run. And I think that's, again, why the first film just held up so well and still holds up very well. And that's one element that I absolutely wanted to steal and utilize for a kind of repurposing of the movie.
It was Lisa Hanson, it was with Cinetel, and she called me up personally and said, Michael, we're doing Philadelphia Experiment, and I think it would be really cool if you would do kind of a cameo. And I said, what do you mean a cameo? She said, well, we want you to be kind of one of the villains, and Malcolm McDowell is doing it, and I'd worked with Malcolm a couple times. So it was like, all right, I'll come up for a couple days. But, you know, you need the budget for this story. You need the budget.
I didn't want to go back and use the same characters. I mean, we've reused the same actors, which is very strange, but we didn't reuse the same characters, which was fun. I mean, you have the reports of what happened to the Eldritch, so you've got some names you can base things on, and that's all fine. And the Eldritch is, quite frankly, just such a wonderful, wonderful name that, yeah, why would you change that? And the whole idea of the time travel, the whole idea of the physical ship moving through, absolutely wanted to sort of keep. But then the notion that the planet actually revolves and you could then reposition the ship into baseball diamonds, have it crash through buildings, just sounded like, yeah, a slight escalation. You know, what would Michael Bay do?
I didn't hear about the remake of Philadelphia Experiment until about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had somebody out for dinner, and she was asking me about which film I had the most fun making. And I said, the Philadelphia Experiment. And I said, have you seen it? She said, no, but it's on Netflix right now. And I said, Really? Fantastic. So I go to Netflix, and there it is. It's this crappy remake. I'm sorry, guys, whoever made that, but I couldn't believe it.
It's hugely challenging. I mean, that's something that I've done quite a few Sci-Fi Channel films, and you start off with a wonderful pitch, which is galactic in scale, and everybody loves, and you get commissioned, and then you have to write the script, and then producers start thinking, how are we going to do that? And it just rolls back in scale. So to combat that, you again roll back to the characters. So a man on the run works, and then however we can do a big set piece, a wonderful, ship through a building, fantastic. And I remember a very early conversation about this where the producer at the end, because the idea in my reimagining is the eldritch energy is building up into a huge weapon that's not only going to destroy the city, it's going to be like an atomic blast. It could destroy most of the states. And I remember we had a much, much bigger ending. And the producer saying, yeah, if we could shoot that underground, then we can limit. So we had to take it in a completely different direction. And that's unfortunately what you've got to do with budgets. However, it does lend itself to some fun, creative decisions sometimes. Sometimes they pay off. Sometimes you go, we tried.
What the hell are you talking about?
In 1943, when the Eldridge came back, the hole closed behind it. This time it stayed open. It's like a gigantic vacuum sucking everything into it. Now, we can't stop it, but I believe that you can.
How?
Don't listen to him, David.
I don't own the story anymore. That's how they were able to do this remake. It was owned by one of the guys who financed the New World investor. And he, I went to him, 10 years ago to talk about this. And I said, it'd be great to do a sequel to Philadelphia Experiment. He said, yeah, it would be. But I don't know who has the rights. The rights just fell through so many cracks, and this person bought it, they sold it, somebody else bought it, they sold it. So where they found the rights, I have no idea, but I couldn't. But the idea of doing a big budget version of it, God, I'd love that. It'd be fun.
Oh.